Yeah, so this week, I've been going to quite a few interviews with immigration. Um, I think that's going to happen more in the future because immigration is making interviews almost a mandatory thing at this point, whereas in the past, they would waive interviews if the case looked like it was straightforward. Um, so this week I went on an asylum interview, and a naturalization interview for two different clients of mine. So the asylum interview, my client waited 9 years to be scheduled, and that gives you an idea of how long asylum cases are taking. Almost a decade to just get scheduled for the interview. That's not even to get a decision. So, the thing with asylum is that if you're waiting that long for your case to be heard, a lot of things can change in the span of 9 years. um, the country conditions can change. So if you're claiming that you're afraid to go back to your home country because you were persecuted or have a well-founded fear that you will be persecuted, things can change in the course of 9 years, right? What if there's no longer a threat to your life or safety? So that's the concern with asylum, is that because immigration is so backlogged, the claim may not be fresh by the time immigration gets around to interviewing you. Luckily, in my case, that wasn't really an issue for my client. He still faces a real danger of going back. Um, but it's really, the concern is if you file something with immigration and 9 years pass, obviously information is going to change. So the asylum application form, which is pretty long already, has to be updated, revised. Any changes have to be carefully gone through with your attorney, because whatever you submit to immigration, it's considered to be testimony, right? You are signing off on the form, that all the information you're providing is truthful and accurate. So, when my client was scheduled for his interview, we had to go through the form, we had to go through the evidence, update the supporting evidence with any more recent um, supporting evidence that we could find, which there was a lot. Um, so all to say that it's a lot of work. Asylum cases are not easy. They're pretty complicated. The in terms of the level of evidence that you should submit for your claim, there's a lot, because it's the client's burden to corroborate their story, their claim of why they're afraid to go back. So, when immigration schedules you for an asylum interview, sometimes you're given a few weeks' notice, sometimes even less. I've had asylum offices schedule my client for an asylum interview, and it's coming up in like 3 days. So, um, just kind of know that if you have an asylum application, that these are the things that could happen. So we had a really good officer, I'm happy to say, for the asylum application. The officer was very professional, fair, patient. That's something that you can't take for granted these days anymore. Um, with the administration that we have right now, which is seemingly just hell bent on only enforcement, only deportation. It's really, um, I guess, refreshing to see that there are still officers who take their job seriously and are still kind of performing their job in a fair manner. So we got very fortunate to have an officer who was professional, who was competent, who was nice. You can't assume that that's going to be the case every single time. Um, so just to let you know, if you've never had an asylum interview before, it's a long process. First you have to check in. Second, you have to wait to be called. Just because they schedule you for 8:30 doesn't mean they'll call you at 8:30. For my client, we were scheduled for 8:45. We got called at around 11:30. So that's about almost a 3 hour wait to be called. Then the interview itself is going to be pretty long because the officer has to ask a lot of questions regarding why someone is afraid to go back to their home country. This is a very detail-oriented interview because whatever decision the asylum officer makes, whether it's a grant or not, they have to back it up with reasons. Why did they approve the asylum? They have to defend it. And also why they decided not to approve it. They have to find a basis why they did not grant the asylum application. So my client's interview lasted roughly 3 to 4 hours. And this is kind of on the shorter side. I've had asylum interviews take the whole day from morning until the evening. In our case, we did not need an interpreter, which made the interview go faster. If you have an interpreter, you're looking at double the time, right? Pretty much. My client testified really well. He was initially really nervous, understandably, but the more he saw that the officer was fair and was asking him questions, um, giving him time to collect his thoughts and to respond to the questions, I think he felt more comfortable. And by the end, his testimony was really compelling. I could see that the officer was really listening to him and understanding where he was coming from. So I'm really hopeful. Uh, we don't have an official decision because the way the asylum office works is they will never tell you what the decision is right after an interview. Typically, what they will do is they'll ask you to come back 2 weeks from the day of the interview to pick up the decision. So that's what we were told by the officer. There are some cases where the asylum office can't make a decision in 2 weeks. Sometimes if there's a security issue or some other complicated issue where they can't readily make a decision in 2 weeks' time, sometimes they have to refer a case to headquarters in Washington, D.C. Um, but I think in my case, my client, um, it's a very strong claim. And I think that's the reason why the officer was able to say, you can come back in 2 weeks, we'll have a decision ready for you. I don't want to jinx myself, but I think it's going to be a grant, so to be continued.